How blessed are we? Thank you, Daniel. So, well, I wanted to look at this idea today of, is your life half empty or half full? Right now, I'm feeling kind of like overflowing after Daniel's song, but we'll look at this from a couple of different angles. You know, a question that we ministers are often asked by people is, where do you get your ideas for your talks? And well, may I remind everyone that we say God is in everything, so quite honestly, inspiration can come from so many different sources. I know many times, doing spiritual practice and applying it to my life, I have all kinds of opportunities to see things and learn from things in my own life that I later would like to share. And I think many of us certainly do our study, work with practitioners of our own. We read inspirational material, certainly scriptures of different faiths, metaphysical authors, and every now and then I find great inspiration from New York Times bestsellers like Born to Kvetch. Yiddish language and culture in all of its moods. And in this book, the author, Michael Wex, tells a story right up front that I had heard, but I'd heard a different version of it. And the version I'd heard is about this lovely young lady who is accompanying her bubby, that's Yiddish for grandma, on a cross-country train trip. Now, Bubby hasn't been the easiest passenger to travel with. So the granddaughter is quite grateful when it's nighttime and the lights go out and everything gets quiet and she hears that people are starting to fall asleep. And so she's just nodding off when all of a sudden she hears Bubby proclaiming, "Oi, am I thirsty? Oi, am I thirsty?" She'd love to ignore it, but she knows it's going to really irritate all the passengers in the train. So she jumps up and says, "Don't worry, Bubby, I'll get you a glass of water." And to that, Bubby responds, "Oh, no, darling, don't you go do that. You're young. Don't worry about this old lady. You just go get some sleep." She knows better. The granddaughter knows better. So she goes, she gets a glass of water, she brings it to Bubby, to which Bubby responds, "Oh, you precious little Bubba. Oh, how sweet of you, blah, blah, blah." Finally, she settles down. The granddaughter goes back to her berth. She lies down. She's nodding off, so glad to hear peace and quiet, when all of a sudden, everyone in the car hears, "Oi, was I thirsty. Oi, was I thirsty." Well, I can't take it. So, Bubby, here you go. In case you hadn't guessed, I was looking or inspired by this idea of the old saying that says, do we look at our lives in the world from a perspective of the glass half empty or glass half full? And the idea that those of us who see it half full insinuates that these are the ones that look at the good that's in life, that appreciate it, have a lot of gratitude, and therefore are more optimistic, happy, and fulfilled people, versus those that tend to focus on where it's half empty and what's not there in their lives that they might want in their lives, that are oriented on the negative that might be occurring now. Or if even things are going well right now, well, let's go back and think about all the negative things like, "Oi, was I thirsty?" Similar to Bubby. Now, I have to say, Bubby, I think, is a character that's quite universal, that it doesn't just belong to any one culture or type of group in the world. As a matter of fact, I think if we did some introspection, we might discover every now and then there's a Bubby in each of us that just wants to focus on where we're not getting what we want out of life, right? So, as we explore this topic, I wanted to contemplate, is our philosophy, science of mind, religious science, do we lean toward the glass half full or the glass half empty? Or neither? Well, I'm going to say the answer to all of those is yes. So if you said yes to any of them, you were right. And here's where I'd like to explore that a little bit further. So yes, in this philosophy, we teach that our perceptions, the way we look at things, has a direct bearing on how we experience life. And specifically, we say that if we can perceive God's nature that we say lies in everything, everyone, including us, all the time, the more we can see that, sense that, perceive that, the more we'll experience God's nature in our lives. But don't we teach that God's nature is one of wholeness, oneness, right? We say all life is interconnected in the one. And I admit, I was not a great math student. You know, math was not one of my strengths when I went through school, but I think I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, that half and half equals one, equals the whole, right? Is that correct? Okay, because really my talk falls apart if it doesn't, if it isn't. So, if we're supposed to look at the whole, I would say certainly if we use this glass half filled with water as an example, focusing on the half that's filled with water would be an example of seeing how God's goodness is present in our lives at any given time and to feel good about that, to rejoice in that, to celebrate that. However, we also say that God's nature is infinite, don't we? And there's no finite expression in the world that can totally express what God is. So the glass half empty could also be that ever greater nature of God that's always seeking to experience and express itself through us beyond anything that we've experienced or expressed before. So it's kind of both, isn't it? If this were a cup of coffee, which of course we know it can't be because we're in the sanctuary, but if it were, for those of us who are coffee lovers, I mean, personally, I would look at just the plain black coffee by itself as something to rejoice in, to absolutely have gratitude for those who know how to roast those beans and create this wonderful beverage that I am so addicted to, I admit it. But at the same time, any barista would tell us, well, yes, what's there is great, but you know, there's so much more you can do with the half-empty glass. That gives room to add cream and, you know, frothy stuff and whipping cream and sprinkles of God knows what that they keep inventing, right? There's so many other things that can be done with what's there. So we can appreciate what's there and also see the possibilities of what could yet be expressed beyond what's there right now. And that to me is the half and half. Now, for those of you who said our philosophy is neither, about neither, you're right too, because we all know that really this glass is not half empty, is it? It's half filled with water, but it's also half filled with air and molecules. There are things that are in this part that we call empty. And the way I would interpret that from a spiritual standpoint is that at any given time, there's always something of God's nature, or actually a lot of God's nature, that is being expressed, that is present in our lives, but we are also filled with this spiritual essence that contains infinite possibilities and that is always seeking another experience of itself through us. You know, the way I love the way this is actually described in Genesis, in the creation story. If we go back and look at this process of creation, which, by the way, this is not just a story of what happened and how the earth came into being. This is something that is unfolding all the time through all of us. That's the way we interpret Scripture metaphysically. And so what happens? God sees this possibility of light, right? God is constantly saying, let there be. Let there be light. And as soon as there's light, what does God do? He claims it to be good. So he sees the goodness of what came forth from the infinite potential. But then does he stop there? No. Then he starts calling forth more and more things and keeps pausing along the way to step back and go, it is good. So there's this capacity to delight in what is, and at the same time know, wow, there's more to be revealed. It's a process, as I said, that's constantly unfolding through us. Now, there's another version of the creation story that I absolutely love that came to us from the metaphysician Ellen DeGeneres, who tells us that in the beginning there was nothing, and then God said, let there be light, and there was light. There was still nothing, but you could see it a lot better. And that version too, I think, contains a lot of spiritual wisdom because, see, God still feels this capacity to call forth light, and when the light is there, to go, wow, and look, there's so much emptiness that can be filled with my nature. Does Ellen even know that she is my metaphysical inspiration today? Right now, each and every one of us has things in our lives to appreciate. The fact that we're even here today, that we got up today, we were alive, we were able to get ourselves here, we were able to have this experience together. I mean, that's just barely scratching the surface. There's so much for us to appreciate, and yet, even if we were to be more aware of that and not take that for granted, there'd still be something that's still seeking a greater expression of itself, right? We always feel the impulse to find new ways to love, to be happy, to experience peace and joy and abundance. So there will always be this half and half that makes up the whole. Now, another way to look at the half empty is where the absence of God's nature, where it's not being fully expressed, can show up as something negative. You know, I think there's a misunderstanding in our teaching. Sometimes it gets misapplied by us saying that we're there to look for the good, to know a greater good that's always there, to be affirmative, is that we absolutely deny the negative conditions and situations of the world, and that is absolutely not true. There's no reason to deny the negative. See, what we see is that our free will, which is part of our God nature, allows us to discover God's goodness within and around us, but it also allows us to feel separate and to act against that nature of the divine in ourselves. And as we do, we create negative conditions out there. We don't deny acts of unkindness, disrespect, discord, dis-ease, poverty, violence, greed, all of that. We do not deny it, but we see these things as effects, as conditions that have no power of their own. They're just coming from our sense of separateness from good, our sense of being separate from each other, and that can be changed. Those perceptions can be changed. We affirm that the underlying goodness in all of us that's greater than any of those conditions out there can be called forth from each of us and transform anything negative into something good. There's always a way to make something good out of a problem or challenge. So seeing and reminding ourselves that where we're feeling there's an absence of that good, remembering how much good is actually there right now and how much more potential for good there is, we're able to call it forth. I got to have a really, really powerful experience of this years back, over 30 years ago, in my corporate experience. And it's probably the only time I've seen this principle applied. And it was actually quite brilliant. It was the first time I ever was confronted with the idea of layoffs and downsizing. Anyone familiar with that? So I was working for a company. I was the manager of a central help desk that was fairly new. There were a lot of companies that didn't run their customer service in that way. A lot of people came to visit us because they were really intrigued. We were kind of cutting edge. We had a great customer service group. And then we also had technicians all over the country that my department would dispatch. Well, our competitor had the nerve to come up with a feature for a product that was something our customers really, really wanted and valued, and that we couldn't quickly catch up and supply it ourselves. So guess what happened? A lot of our customers dropped away and went to the competitor. Well, fewer customers, fewer phone calls, fewer needs for people to go out and service equipment. So we were starting to look at the possibility of layoffs and downsizing. My boss at the time spent a lot of time. I remember he would talk to me about, he says, you know, we have such a good organization here. We've got so much talent here in this help desk. We've got so many talented people out there in the field. There's got to be a way to take that and do something with it. He was looking at what was, and also looking that there have to be possibilities to take from this and expand. And guess what happened? This was right around the time that startup companies were forming in the Silicon Valley. And so these companies were developing products that were being rolled out across the country, but they were small and they didn't have a customer service organization. They didn't have technicians to serve their products. My boss jumped on that so fast, going up and meeting with these companies and saying, we've got the staff, we've got talented technicians, we will get trained on your product and we will provide you with service. And through that, he saved hundreds of jobs. Now, what was he doing again? He was looking at the good, but not denying. He didn't deny that there was a situation happening that could result in downsizing, but he said there's so much good and there's something more that we can do with it. So I'd invite us to look in our lives today, where things are going well, and we have a tendency to take a lot of that for granted, don't we? Where things are going well, to consciously put our attention on that, to be aware, to be grateful. And as we're grateful, though, to remember that they came from an infinite invisible. Remember, the good that's in the world came out of the goodness of God that was in you seeking an expression of itself. It is not your source of good. If we only focus on this, on the good we have in our lives, while forgetting where it came from, then what do? We tend to cling to it because we're afraid when it goes away, then suddenly we won't have good anymore. No, the nature of God in you is bigger than that. It'll find a new way to recreate itself through you if you're open to it. So remember that whatever good you have, give thanks for it as having been realized out of your God nature. And then if you're facing challenges, and I know some of the challenges we face can be very daunting, but know that these challenges, these negative conditions in your life in no way define you, diminish you, in any way create anything that changes your spiritual nature. There are still ways that goodness is present in your life. There are still ways that you can feel love and accept it and share it. There are still ways that you know how to laugh and bring joy to a situation. There are still ways that that spiritual nature in you can be realized no matter what. Don't buy into the idea that you are anyway defined by your human circumstances. Please put your conscious awareness on the gratitude for how the good is there right now. Look for it, appreciate it. What we focus on increases. And then from there, also remember that the good that's there came from that infinite source that is still there, that is going to show you a way to move out of the situation, to transform it into something good. That's my invitation for us as we move into the season. And I would ask us something special too. I've heard conversations from people saying that it's difficult right now with what's going on in our nation and in the world to feel grateful. I know that, yes, it's hard. Families right now, there are many families that are polarized because of their different points of view. There are many people around the world that are feeling very separate from one another. Can we just look at our human history and see how much over time we have healed those differences, how much good we have created? If we were to look back 100 years and see the evolution that has occurred for us to heal those kinds of differences, that's still there. That came from an infinite source. So as we look at these situations, that's our calling to know there's a greater good, a greater love, a greater respect and understanding and compassion that we can call forth. This is our opportunity to learn to do that so that we can all live in a greater state of peace and respect. I hope, if you have a chance, I hope that you can join us on Wednesday evening, my Thank Tank talk, which is really a service where we will have people getting up and making proclamations of gratitude. I hope you can be with us for that energy of giving thanks and also committing in our gratitude to being vessels of greater good in the world, greater channels of God's love and healing. As we balance our mindset of the half full, where we appreciate what's there, and also appreciate the half empty, the potential for ever greater good to be called forth through each of us, then we bring a greater experience of wholeness and oneness into our lives and into the world. Are you willing to join me in that intention? Okay, let's pray. So right here, right now, we turn our attention inward and feel that presence that we have felt always throughout our lives. That desire to be happy, to be well, to experience well-being in every way can be imagined, felt, and realized, and to recognize that as a power and a presence out of which all creation comes into being. It is the goodness of God seeking that next level of knowingness and realization and expression of itself through us. I know that we are all filled and surrounded by that nature of the divine, and that as we know its presence in all things, as we see how much good, how present it is, how fully expressed it is in the world, and keep looking at that and feeling awe and gratitude for it, we also remember that where it may not be expressed, the potential for it to come forth is still there. So God is in all those situations where people may be feeling separate from God, including in our lives, lives of our loved ones, anywhere in the world. And we know that as we know this truth together, we are blessed by it, and it blesses others because we are all one. We bless our church. We bless all churches everywhere, synagogues, temples, mosques, ashrams, all paths to God. And just with that full and grateful heart for all the good that God is now and always, and all the good that is yet to be revealed, I release this word knowing it is so, I let it be, and so it is. Together we say, Amen.